are support measures, support schemes that are put in place, but we tend to forget that in countries like, let's say, Malta, Slovakia, it's not necessarily the same type of support they're receiving. So once again, plenty of challenges, plenty of hindrances, obstacles, and yet you remain optimistic. So this optimism actually is reflected in the conclusion of the French presidency. In the previous panel, well, for those who stayed, I'm sorry, but I might be repeating myself, but it's important, I think, to understand how all of that works before we dig into the details of those conclusions, presidency conclusion. You need to understand the institutional framework to really understand what EU presidency is all about and what the conclusions actually mean. So it's not just a country waving its flags and saying that I'm holding the presidency. Let's say that first of all, the presidency of the EU, how shall I illustrate that? Well, it's not acting as a guide. In fact, you actually accompany the process. Every 6 months, a country takes the lead. And within the Council of the 27 member states, to give the impulse, the trigger for the different texts that are being negotiated, and to make sure that this is leads to fruition. And they also, the country is also expected to tell about the future impetus. And so they would have to extract from the overall system to actually get everybody, among the 7 member states, to agree on a target. Well, in certain cases, they just agree on the minimum. But over the past 6 months, under the French presidency, so as you know, playing the role of a conductor, if you like, or the lead, they tried to reach a number of conclusions, and those conclusions, in fact, covered a whole range of subjects. But today, we're going to focus on 3 of them, if you allow me. I shall try to summarize. And I need to summarize because otherwise we won't have time. And the 3 items I would like to refer to include those that are linked to acquisition threats, that in fact the risk of being taken over by foreign companies, and the EU is trying to protect the industry. And there comes the author's rights, or the copyright. And I think that this is a subject which is going to be quite difficult. That is known as the discoverability. That's the way they put it in English. Découvrabilité in French. So it's up to you experts to explain what all of that is hiding. But so this is one of the other priorities which we shall try to deal with as comprehensively as possible. And of course, we expect to hear you, panel members, how your vision is in terms of how it's going to evolve in the next months. So in other words, where these different orientations are likely to bear fruit. So that's, I think, it is time for me to turn to the panel members. So, in terms of the acquisition fraud, the competition from the outside, is there any volunteer to start? Who's going to start first? who's going to be daring enough to start? Just as you like it. Pauline, go ahead. Well, I don't know exactly where to start from. The real issue is what's at stake. Why are we suddenly worried about this? In the past, we were not so much aware or conscious of the fact that we're likely to lose something. In the audiovisual sector, that's the issue of the intellectual property rights evolving very quickly on a day-to-day basis, would it be in license contracts or other types of contracts for distributing the cultural goods. Well, there is the potential of losing the rights, of works that have been produced in Europe by European players. So we need to be clear about the reality of that threat. For us, it's a real threat. We have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis within the framework of drafting the contracts. And it is important to come up with the relevant measures to protect ourselves. And that's where the EU and member states need to intervene to help us protect us. This can take different forms. In France, for example, if I remember well, there is a text that deals with the strategic audiovisual assets. So sort of a catalog of the rights and the extent to which those can be transferred to non-European players. So if this issue of the rights is not secured, we might end up non-European players producing in Europe, and they will generate on the basis of the work done by the European states. And by the way, it's so difficult to define. So it's in fact the value of the creation would be outsourced, externalized, if you like. And this then would raise the issue of the long-term survival of the authors. So the artistic and control of their work, and then the copyrights. That is very important for the freelance workers to be able to continue to live and continue to create. And then there are also the rights linked to the remaining catalog so that the producers can continue to invest in future creations. Well, this is similar to what Veronique referred to. Well, it's not really a buyout, it's a buyout. What it actually means is that non-European economic players would resort to, I would say, aggressive. Yes, normally it can be aggressive when two entities contracting, one is so big and the other so small, so it can be highly aggressive. So how the Commission tries to deal with this issue? Well, the buyout issue is something which is quite frequent in the audiovisual sector. The filmmakers and other players, in fact, tends to be somehow impoverished, if I may put it this way, by the bigger players. In the audiovisual sector, the idea is to actually jointly manage their rights, and this is what helped them to face giant players, generally based on in the US, video on demand platforms who act based on the American legislation and forcing somehow the offers to sign take it or leave it type of contracts. Take it or leave it. So they would have a sort of flat amount, and then even though your piece of work is extremely successful, you would have to sign once and all. So you produce your music, you you're being bought out, in fact, of your own work. So it can be, there are different types of buyout. So it can be for a given period of time, it can be forever. In any case, let's say the balance of powers between the large player and the small power is such that it's aggressive. Normally, the platform had to go through the collective association. So, but they circumvent the European model by importing, so to speak, the American legislation into a contract. They sign directly with the offer. So that's the reason why it is important. And by the way, I'd like to pay tribute to the French presidency for what they have been doing. So, based on submissions made by member states, the conclusions of the presidency is that it's a broad issue, which is developing across Europe, and therefore it has to be dealt with at a European level. So the European Commissioner Thierry Breton, a few days ago at the European Parliament, said, well, congratulations to France for that, and we are going to focus on that in the months to come. So the issue is on the table, if I may put it this way. It's a matter of having a collective approach. It's a matter of a balance of power. We need to act collectively in order to defend our model. I did refer to the artificial intelligence, to the metaverse, and we need to make sure that our model, European model, is at the core of all this process. It's very important for our cultural diversity, and we need to act on time. What about publishing? Are you facing similar problems? And if not, are did the French conclusions, in fact, give you some inspiration? Well, the buyout, well, I say that's not part of the practices. Having said this, well, the type of relationship which you can have with distributors, well, we can, in fact, face, in fact, a small, let's say, misuses. So gradually, the partner or the small player would have to accept gradually what is imposed by the larger player. So, well, of course, in the French presidency's conclusion, so there are plenty of things which are quite inspiring, and maybe not in the buyout, but the what is known as the discoverability issue. Well, that's very important. And here again, we have to make sure that we do not are, let's say, overwhelmed by non-European legislation. So it's to avoid things being or coming outside Europe in terms of legislation. Rico, well, let's say that this is an issue which is specific to the audiovisual sector, so therefore I'm not too well on the buyout issue. Having said this, you have the concept which you refer to as discoverability. It is important to always recognize the role of the producer. What's the producer's role? The producer takes some risks. There is always some risks there. And the contractual freedom is the pillar. It's the process whereby this risk-taking is recognized for the producer. This is referred to by the directive, and that aspect is or has to be the counterpart in these discussions. With regard to the European dimension versus the rest of the world, and particularly the US, it is important, at least in the field of music, to consider the following. First of all, our largest member organizations, well, let's say, let me put things differently. In fact, European production has never been so strong compared to what happened over the past 20 years, whether it be France, Italy, Latin countries, but also other countries. Most top 20s are in fact our local, let's say, producers and in local languages. So, and this without any legislative intervention. It's just because the content is so attractive for the users, for the listeners, and they are just successful without having to resort to legislation. Now, while we should never forget, however, that even with just free contractual freedom, you can be successful. We can act in such a way that the European cultural production be successful without legislative intervention. Well, that's for recorded music, but I think that for the audiovisual sector, things might be different. Pauline? Yes, in fact, we have diverse sectors that are not facing the same types of difficulties. In the audiovisual sector, facts are different. First of all, we have a legal framework which defines the national intervention to ensure that this sector works properly. You have to bear in mind that across the EU, not all countries have the same production capability. On that issue of a legal framework to protect local production, you have to take into account the need for cultural diversity within Europe. We need to have people able to create in the audiovisual sector, even in the smaller European countries. Well, of course, it might be more or less difficult, more or less expensive, and there is also the leeway. You need to be able to, of course, have an audience, and it has to pay off for those people who created, for them to be able to continue to create. Now, we, as I said, we have the audiovisual sector directive, which serves as a frame, and public money can be can contribute in order to support us. And there are new formats, like the serials segments have been developing across Europe, and they are actually successful. It did create a significant impetus in terms of attracting larger audiences. But then, are all of that done in such a way that the offers can survive in the long term? Does it allow for freedom of creation? I mean, diverse creation? Well, nothing. Nobody is opposed to entertainment. In fact, it's important to create, to come up with pieces of work that are attracting people. And audiovisual work plays a role beyond just entertainment. It's like the mirror of the society. the societal dimension of audiovisual creation is very important, in particular in the area of cinema. And we would like, in our community, to see that continue, even though we are also happy to see that the audiovisual production is booming, so to speak. And the next question is the sustainability of this process. If you produce so much entertainment and you invest a lot, and then somehow you pollute also. So what about our social responsibility in that process? Well, we shall come back to that later because it's a key issue. But for the time being, let's finish with that bit of our conversation. And I think that we can now talk about what is known as discoverability and what is at stake. It's one of the key conclusions in the French presidency. That's comparatively new. It's sort of an innovative public policy approach. So, and you were saying that in the publishing sector, it's an issue. Well, we just to give you an example, each year about 500,000 new books are published, and of course you need to attract the audience, readership to these books. And one of the dimensions with regard to cultural diversity is the following. Let's consider the pandemics. During the pandemics, people were some had to stay at home. They started buying books, and in our sector, people did buy plenty of books. However, most of them bought books via online platforms like Amazon, and they tended to buy bestsellers, and so therefore the small, let's say, authors are not impacted by this boom. So if you then turn to the library, the small library, you can walk around and a person might actually be able to give you an advice and not just let you buy what, the largest, the most successful books or the most known books. Well, Ludovic has been working on that, I think. The challenge of which the emerging artists have been facing, the heritage catalogue has been very much highlighted. People started to rediscover the Beatles or songs by Patricia Cass. So the lockdown period has been very complicated for the small authors. And now concerts are back, and traditionally that's a way for an emerging artist to get to be known when they come to the marketplace. And then today there is a sort of, I would say, large, excessive number of small players, and therefore it's more and more difficult for the small players to make room for themselves in this area.
Now the theater operator, owners, etc., are going to have to once again be active, to put the names of people on the billboards to see who's coming. Now, as far as the authors are concerned, and here I agree what was said, the pandemic, the lockdown has pushed people towards the digital uses, which has given opportunities to VOD, musical streaming, etc. That's great, but is this sustainable over time? Can we continue with such modes? For the VOD, there's the problem of buyouts, and with the musical streaming, there's a real problem in terms of copyright and royalties. I mean, when you look at the thousands of people on Spotify, you have 7 million people, 7 million offers on streaming, and this is thanks to the collective management, which offer large access to the repertoire. Yet you have only a few authors benefiting from this. Why? Well, for several reasons. Access, or the discoverability is the challenge. The homepage of these platforms, the playlists, all of the things that play an important role in prescription, to try to guide people in the works they read or listen to. Well, here there's a real problem with regards to the transparency of algorithms, and here maybe we need legislation and intervention. Maybe we should try to promote European works. This exists in the audiovisual sector, but what about music? These are questions we might ask. Do we need to promote a certain repertoire so that the more niche type of repertoire will have access to their public? There's a study that's going to come out end of September on the question of streaming and what our prospects are on this market, which offers great potential, but which gives almost 0% royalties to their authors. So this is a market which is really flourishing. Two key questions here, I think. Veronique, the value gap, as it's called, which is in fact the value transfer, in fact, the transfer of value. So let's speak in French, so the value gap. Here we can talk about the fairness of the remuneration of these online models, which is nothing like what you get in the performing arts sector, of course. But, it's not the same as with the old times, with records and where the artist was remunerated. And this is especially a problem for the emerging artists. So this is a real challenge. We spoke of Article 17, and I think that it's a bit linked to this subject, in fact. Are there other challenges with regards to the transposition of the text? Let me remind you that a directive is a European law which does not apply when it's voted. It's not going to come into force. For a directive, each member state has to look at the text of a directive, look at its own national law, and then try to fit the directive into its legislative framework. So it means that it's a text which, to a certain extent, has to be adapted to national law, maybe be the subject of a bit of interpretation, which has to be as true to the original text as possible. Otherwise, the European Court of Justice will say it's not a true transposition. So I hope that this is all right for everyone. Now, as far as this question is concerned, I have a comment to make that I'll repeat. You should not describe the situation of music and the European repertoire as being negative because we have data. We see that the new types of music, the new artists have a great deal of success. There's a real generational change in the European music landscape, which is exceptional. And this is why you need to be aware of it. Now, as far as the transfer is, the value gap is concerned, you need to note that the Europeans' decision is historical because for the first time, an international body has said that the platforms are responsible for the content they transmit. For us who have been in Brussels for 15 years, it's something that would not have been envisageable 10 years ago. It's a veritable revolution. Now, it might seem evident, obvious, but it wasn't. What do you have to do if you're a responsible member? You need to get a license. For us in the music sector, it's essential they take a license. We are not in a situation where we're trying to prevent people access to content. No, we want the content to be as available as possible on the greatest number of platforms possible. So our objective at the legal level is to have an environment where we can give licenses to everyone, and this on a contractual negotiation base. This, in our opinion, is the best system to ensure that the artist, the entire chain, be remunerated. The more licenses, the more the artists, producers, etc., will be remunerated. So in Article 17, this is what we are looking at. So this is what Article 17 is all about. Yes, it's essential, and it was very clear. The challenges here are quite revolutionary, especially when we look back 10, 12 years ago, where we've totally changed paradigms here. We've changed our vision of things, and this is a real step